Welcome to the Bigger Cash Flow podcast, where we interview business owners and real estate investors that share tips and tricks on how to grow your cash flow and reach financial freedom.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Bigger Cash Flow podcast. My name is Bo Kim, your host, and today we have an exciting episode with Travis Hornsby. He founded Student Loan Planner after helping his physician wife navigate ridiculously complex student loan repayment decisions. To date, he's consulted on over $400 million in student debt personally, more than anyone else in the country. He is a Chartered Financial Analyst and brings his background as a former bond trader, trading billions of dollars on Wall Street. He brings that same intensity to analyzing the best repayment paths for graduate degree professionals with 6 figures of student debt. He's helped over 1,500 clients save over $80 million on their student loans and has been featured in US Newsweek, Business Insider, Huffington Post, Rolling Stones, Bigger Pockets Money, and now the Bigger Cash Flow podcast. Welcome to the show, Travis.
I love that last part, Bo. You're making me blush.
That was a mouthful. You're amazing. How you doing?
Good. Excited to be on the show and hopefully add some value for your listeners today.
So let's just jump right in. And Travis, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and your life before Student Loan Planner?
Sure. So I was a bond trader, and I was really interested in helping others because my hero was Jack Bogle, and I thought it was really amazing how he focused on keeping costs low, giving the maximum returns to investors long term. I thought that was really amazing because I understood compound interest thanks to growing up with my granddad, who was a great investor, and got to kind of watch, how that could make such a big difference in someone's life over many, many years. So I thought, okay, I want to go be in investments. So I just networked online. I was on these investment forums, just like crazy. And I've got a job from that. And so I went up and worked my way into the trading desk, this giant mutual fund company, traded $10 billion of bonds, really honed my Excel skills and, learned how to manage huge reams of data. And I really liked having that skill set, but I just wasn't passionate about being in a big company environment. And so I kind of got really interested in the FIRE movement, and the whole ideas behind Mr. Money Mustache and Physician on Fire and some of these other people, in the movement that were talking about retiring early. And I thought, well, okay, if I don't like corporate America, and I don't think I will like corporate America anytime soon, then I'm going to try for radical early retirement. So I did that, and I traveled around Europe for maybe about half a year, and then all in was probably out of the workforce about 18 months, just traveling, went to Latin America for a while, and eventually met my now wife. And so we were kind of talking about her student loans, and that gradually kind of became something that I had to become really knowledgeable about personally because I wanted to marry this person and I wanted to understand our finances. So, because, it was so important to me in general, because that was my personality. And then I found out with all my Excel skills that I had as a bond trader that I was having trouble modeling it. And I thought, well, shoot, if I'm having trouble modeling this, then something's really, really wrong.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of like the genesis for Student Loan Planner, was just stumbling upon this super complex problem that nobody was really solving.
A lot of us who start in corporate America that have that aha moment, I feel like they either end up working more to reach FIRE earlier, but you decided to make a radical change and, kind of go on a sabbatical for 18 months. That it's like a mini retirement. Did that change your perspective on life and what's important or anything like that you can share with us?
Oh yeah, I think more people need to be focused on sabbaticals rather than early retirement. For me, I was just burned out, and that sounds ridiculous to say that I was burned out after 3 years in the workforce. So my dad worked in the workforce for 40 years, and my mom worked in the workforce, 25 years. And so it's like, okay, how can this guy, who's got every privilege under the sun, be burned out after 3 years? How ridiculous is that, right? But I think more people are kind of realizing that you only live once, and you can't necessarily get a gold star for fulfilling someone else's dream. And if you are not in the right seat, then you owe it to yourself to do something radical to get in the right seat, or at least to go on a journey to try to find the right seat. And I think that I'm more of a believer in meaningful work rather than early retirement now. It kind of took me a while to realize that, but kind of what I'm realizing is I think that most people that have a healthy approach to this are going to have multiple retirements. You're going to, over your career, like maybe you'll build a company, you'll sell it, or you'll get involved in a real estate deal and you'll, just be tired of dealing with the same set of properties. Maybe you'll divest, right? And then maybe you'll be away from it a little while and you'll realize what parts you miss about it. And then you'll use those lessons and start something new. So for me, it was just more of like I had this interesting conversation with my brother. Like he really likes routines. He really likes knowing where he has to be at work, when he has to be at work. He likes predictability. And that's a lot of people in the workforce. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think for, some of the people out there, probably the same kind of people that, accidentally struck a stone on the wall and created fire. Now, maybe I'm being a little, self-serving here, but, for the crazy people out there that like building things, I think that being in the same spot for years and years can be just kind of really difficult. So, the nice part is I could kind of fuse two of my interests, helping people like my wife who really don't care about finances and this interest in financial independence. And actually there's all kinds of intersections with all these different student loan rules and how somebody that maybe made some decisions that they wish they could change a few things about them. And you can turn that person from just a really sad, depressing situation and show them how and empower them to be the next wild success story. So that's what I love doing, really.
That's awesome. So you mentioned after your 18-month trip, you met your wife and you had to learn about student loans. Did you have experience dealing with student loans in your own finances? How was your finances like?
Yeah. So remember, I said I had every privilege under the sun, right? So for me, that doesn't necessarily mean that I had, a silver spoon in my mouth, but it just meant that I worked really hard and got very lucky being born in the right state. So I was born in Florida. Florida has the Bright Futures program. And then also my parents, even though my dad was a teacher, didn't have a ton of money, but they got into like the prepaid tuition plan in the state. So right away when going to school, I had, this huge advantage of having basically tuition covered by the state of Florida for everybody that got over like a kind of a relatively low SAT score. And then on top of that prepaid tuition that kind of was refundable. So it covered like the tuition on top of that. So before getting any scholarships, like I already had those two things to like basically give me like some money towards housing, and have tuition covered. And then on top of that, I got, some scholarships that I stacked. And so from doing that, I came out of school, not only not owing any debt, but probably positive, around like $20,000 to $40,000 in net worth. Instead of owing the typical college debt, I had the typical college debt and assets. So I was very, very, very lucky. And I just kind of attribute a lot of that to, my parents, being very lucky in the state that I was born in, being very lucky with the teachers that I had around me. So and also I'll say this, for a bachelor's degree program, it's a lot easier to get scholarships and a lot easier to come out with. If you're going to come out with debt, it's probably going to be a modest amount of debt, right? And my wife was, went to medical school, and medical school is super expensive. And it doesn't matter, if you're the smartest person since Einstein, like there's a ton of people that are really smart to go to medical school, right? So the medical schools don't have any reason to give big scholarships, and maybe there's a couple that do, but they limit their class sizes to 100 people, so the acceptance rate's 3%. So there's just not a lot of great scholarships out there, and my wife, like she was super frugal, and her parents sacrificed a ton of money to try to help her go to medical school, and she still had a lot of debt. So I thought, wow, like what if somebody is just totally financially illiterate and takes out a bunch of debt? Like what would happen to them? And so I wrote about some of the things that I was using with my wife, like the spreadsheet that I developed with my kind of bond trader Excel background. And I shared that, and that thing went viral because like nobody had something out there like that. And so all these people, I put in the article, like, oh, by the way, I do a little bit of like student loan consulting on the side. And I got so many people reaching out to me, like, I want a plan, I need help, like I'm drowning, this thing looks like it's really useful, what should I do? And I was like, oh, okay, like, I'll do this and see if it's interesting. And it was super interesting, which is why I decided to do this thing more full time.
There's a lot of, issues and stories about student loan and how there's a bubble right now. And it seems like there's so many people around me who have student loan debt. They also have high paying jobs, but they need to figure out how to navigate through all of this, right? And I think that's what your company is trying to do. So can you share with us a little bit about some of the research that you did, especially when you were helping your wife, as much you can share with us? And is there any kind of mistakes and pitfalls that even you ran into early on that looking back, hey, maybe I would have done this a little bit differently?
Well, we certainly would have managed her loans a lot differently if we had known what I know now. I mean, basically, the PSLF program would have actually saved her probably about $80,000 if we had managed it correctly according to the beginning. But instead, she made some mistakes consolidating her loans, and then that erased a bunch of the credit that she would have had during her residency and fellowship training. And so instead of having years worth of PSLF credit, we had almost no credit towards PSLF. So it was a really unfortunate set of circumstances. I'll say that the thing with the research that I did, honestly, I poured through like federal Q&As and comments that the department's made, and resources the Department of Education put out. And I must have spent, I don't know, when I was starting doing this, I probably spent dozens and dozens of hours pouring through this stuff. And I had to understand all of the rules perfectly to build a spreadsheet that I felt confident in, right? So, I had to make sure that that stuff was accurate. So if anybody wanted to kind of do this from scratch, that's what I would kind of suggest, is just going on to a lot of the federal Q&As about income-based repayment programs, because they have a lot of details in there. But I thought, wow, this stuff should be able to be boiled down to something that people can either read online for free if they have a limited time, or if you have a big enough problem, then you can pay somebody for help. So one of the things I'm passionate about is trying to help people, in addition to the people that we kind of make a profit on, which is the typical client would be like a dentist who has 400,000 of debt, who's trying to save an extra 50 to 100,000, managing their loan forgiveness strategies the right way. Like that's like a typical client of ours. And a non-typical client that doesn't pay us for anything, we had a lot of people reaching out to us about paying their student loans while they're in prison. So the reason is because we have an article that ranks like the top on Google for how to pay your loans in prison. And I did that intentionally, not because I thought it was a great way to find clients, but if you think about the impact that we can have in somebody's life, if you simply add an agent to your student loan account before or during your time in prison, and instead of your interest compounding, you having 16% collection charges and watching your credit score drop several hundred points, where you're not even able to get a loan when you get out of prison to be a successfully re-entered member of society, the student loans can actually tank somebody's finances, which puts them in a higher risk of going back to prison, maybe out of sheer desperation. So that's a little thing that we can do to fix that person's, or help save that person's situation, right? So we have kind of multiple goals. Like basically the way to summarize it was, the student loan planner exists to help people with $50,000 to $1 million in student loan debt live freer financial lives without stress and anxiety. So like that's why we exist. But within that, I have like goals of, like I said, helping people re-enter society, like through that one example, also saving people's lives. A lot of people are suicidal over their debt. I get emails all the time. It's really, really stressful emotionally. I don't handle that kind of stress well, but I get these people, like, they're like, I'm going to jump off this bridge at this point in time. And so I have to refer a lot of people to mental health and those kind of things. Not a lot. Obviously the majority of people are dealing with it okay. But then also marriages, we probably save a lot of marriages that are worth saving. But just by showing people, hey, like this financial stress that, it's going on in your marriage is actually solvable. You can overcome this. It doesn't have to be the thing that causes you to split up. You can get a handle on this. So I don't know, those are a couple of examples. There's a ton of numbers behind it, but that's the why, right? You have to have a why for being in business. It can't just be, at least in my opinion, like, oh, let's make more profit. I mean, it can be, but I don't think that's going to make you want to get up in the morning. Like that's part of the reason why I wasn't super thrilled about corporate America, is even though we had a big purpose in life, it still did feel like you were kind of like a cog in the machine when you have, 10,000 employees or more. It's difficult.
Let's kind of tie this into, the theme of this podcast, where we talk about, interviewing entrepreneurs, business owners who are trying to create cash flow, right? And a lot of my listeners are real estate investors. And the way that I personally viewed student loans was that, if we're starting off a race of financial independence and financial freedom, it seemed like people with, 50, 100 or other six figures of student loan debt aren't even on the racetracks. They haven't even entered the stadium. It feels to me like they need to get there to zero and then start on their way. Can you kind of talk to us about how you view it? Is it something that they necessarily need to pay off first to get started, or can they do both at the same time?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example here. So a lot of people think that to get to zero, you have to pay off your debt and completely, right? Like that's the typical way of thinking about debt, is to get to zero, you got to pay your debt off. Well, a lot of your listeners will understand with real estate that, having debt in some situations can be a good thing. if you can get interest rates at a low rate, or you can get favorable terms, and you can make sure that your net worth is going to be growing over time, then debt's actually not that big of a problem as long as it's backed by an asset, right? So the problem with student loans is there's no asset backing it. So it's not an asset backed, debt instrument. So there's nothing to seize. You can't go seize someone's brain when they don't pay you, your student loan payment on time, right?
Right.
So for that reason, there's inherent insecurity, because unlike houses or land or other things, like humans have feelings and emotions, and sometimes those are unpredictable, and sometimes that human capital is affected by recessions and things like that. So an example would be somebody who is a chiropractor who has $250,000 of debt and a $50,000 income. A lot of people would look at that person and say that person's screwed. They have no hope in life, right? Financially, right? Like if you went to talk to a traditional financial advisor with that kind of debt amount, that's what they would say. But instead, what that person can do is say, well, I can pay 10% of my income after a big deduction. So it's about $100 a month, $150 a month, something like that. That's your student loan payment. At the end of 20 years, that person might have to pay income taxes on the forgiven balance. So say 250 grows into 300. Now they have to pay 200K in taxes in 20 years from now. So you got to save another $500 to $1,000 a month in a brokerage account, or maybe even real estate, right, to pay off in a lump sum that 200K tax bomb at the very end of the 20 years. An example in that situation, you're looking at that chiropractor and you're saying, wow, this guy's on like negative 10th base, right? I mean, in terms of put it in baseball terms, like, or negative 10th inning or whatever, I don't know. And so this person, instead of feeling sorry for themselves, trying to get back to $0, that person, if they have a good amount of capital and they know the different, FHA rules, or, all the different kind of lending standards, like they could probably go out and buy a starter property and start a real estate empire, and that person, instead of being kind of a victim mentality, that person's actually just in need of a plan. And that's all they needed. They didn't need any kind of unique, shocking, radical life change. Like, in fact, I would say that if the person's just simply willing to drive a paid off car and live in a house that's cheaper than they can afford, then everything else will fall into place. The not-for-profit government loan forgiveness program, those loans are forgiven tax-free. And so your net worth might jump 6 figures overnight. It might have a 6-figure increase overnight. So it's kind of like you've run one lap already, and then you get another lap all at once. That's like happens automatically. You don't even have to stress about it. So I think that most people that are focused on cash flow need to realize, like, student loans are for some people, they're a debt, and they're a bad debt because they're not backed by assets. And then for other people, it's actually a good debt in the sense that they shouldn't try to pay it down. They should focus on investing instead, because their debt to income ratio is so high, it doesn't make sense to pay it off.
That's very interesting, because, some of my listeners, especially that one friend who had 150K in student debt, he was, just asking me, hey, what do I do with this? Because I know, Bo, you're going out there and buying rental properties and you're growing it, but I'm just like drowning. I'm paying all these monthly payments and I have nothing left. And I was really looking at his finances and I was not seeing the case. But I think it's perspective in terms of what can you do, what kind of programs are out there. So maybe you want to delay and reduce those payments and buy a cash flowing asset and just increase your net worth over time. That's a very interesting perspective.
So let's say a pharmacist has 200,000 in debt, and a lot of pharmacists, especially in urban areas that are popular to live in, they're actually having job crises. So we say there's a student loan bubble. There's actually a bubble of professionals too. So, for example, the number of pharmacy schools tripled in the past 12 years, tripled. So you have literally triple the number of graduating people with pharmacist degrees, and all of the giant national chains are like, this is fantastic. We have this giant labor force that we didn't have access to. And now there's no negotiating leverage in most parts of the country. So now I'm actually hearing a lot of pharmacists that are struggling to get full-time hours. So say that pharmacist is making 80,000 working 25 hours a week instead of 140,000, like pharmacists used to get really easily, right? So that person, instead of feeling sorry for themselves, can say, well, actually, if you pay, 10% of your wages, right, you're still left over with like 72,000 or something like that. So that 72 working 25 hours a week is greater than what you would make as a college grad, right? So that income, since it's stable and predictable, even though you're not getting as many hours as you used to, you could use that to build your real estate empire, So that's a case where, say that pharmacist like decides that they're going to use that stable income as, kind of an asset, right? To build a portfolio of rental properties. And before long, like after a few years, maybe that real estate side interest will become such a big deal, right? That they won't even need to have to rely on their career as a pharmacist anymore. So they've kind of relied on their education and their skills and their initial job kind of path and use that to chart a completely new path. So I just kind of thought I'd throw that out there just in case, there might be a lot of health professionals listening to your podcast that are thinking, hey, I really wish I could get into real estate, but I just feel like I can't with my student loans. Actually, nothing can be further from the truth.
I know you mentioned in your blog about loan refinances. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what a loan refinance is and what individual might be able to take advantage of this?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you have private sector employment and your debt to income ratio is below 1.5 to 1, so that means you have 100K in income and you've got debt less than 150K. That's debt to income ratio 1.5 to 1 or less, right? Also, you have to have an emergency fund of 6 months expenses in the bank. I don't want anybody refinancing that's at all financially unstable, because if you do, you're not going to be able to pause your payments. There's a chance that you could default, right? And then if you default with private loans, there's no remedies. It's just a mess. You do not want to default with private loans. So that just simply means if you have a good debt to income ratio, meaning like you owe very little debt relative to your income, you're really solid financially, you're not going to get any loan forgiveness. Well, now you have like a 6.5% interest, debt that's not tax deductible, that's not backed by an asset. That's just a pain in the butt. And you want to get out of your life, and you should get out of your life. So there's no benefit to keeping debt around that you're needing to pay off, especially if it's student loan debt. So for that reason, somebody could refinance at 6.5 and maybe save 1 or 2% on their interest rate. So they could cut their interest costs, meaning that if for the same dollar amount of payments, more money is going to principal, which means you're going to get out of debt even sooner. So I'll tell you that the way that most refinancing is done right now is through lots of ad-based relationships called affiliate marketing. So you have a lot of websites out there. If you type in like any kind of refinancing related search phrase into Google, you're going to see a lot of companies that have links that if you click on those links to apply for refinancing, you're going to get a lower rate if you find one and go through with it, but they're also going to get a big cut. So what we did is decided to try to introduce price competition into the market by offering the majority of what we earn as referral compensation for these different companies. We give that back to the reader in the form of a cashback bonus. So as an example, somebody could refinance $50,000 with Earnest, through our link and get a lower interest rate, hopefully, but also $500 cash back if they use our link on our site. So same thing with, Common Bond and a lot of these other companies, you can get anywhere from right now $200 to $1,000 cash back, which is not the main reason you should ever refinance. That's just a gravy, thing, right? That's just like an extra bonus. And so the main thing you should be focused on is getting a lower interest rate. That's the key. That's the only real reason to refinance. But I just thought I'd mention that, it matters to comparison shop, but it's more than comparison shopping. It's also getting some of these cashback bonuses, because in real estate, a lot of times if you're doing like a refi or something like that, correct me if I'm wrong, Bo, but you have to actually pay money to get, something appraised, or you have to pay a bank, maybe an origination fee. And student loan refinancing, the market is so hot and competitive for good borrowers right now that they'll actually kind of pay you to refinance, which is kind of shocking.
Do you have any advice for people? They might be either college students going into college, high school students going into college, or working professionals, engineers and accountants. A lot of them also go for their master's degree, right? So these people who are considering taking on some student loan, is there any preventive measures that they can take ahead of time?
In terms of preventative measures, if you're planning like 20 years into the future for your kid, actually one of the best preventative measures is to maximize your own retirement savings and not put away any money for their college. Because I was just looking in prep for this podcast tonight, I just thought I'd find a fun example. So Princeton University, if you make less than $65,000, they'll let you go totally for free. So, if you have a kid and you want that kid to go to Princeton, then, one of the things you should know is, one, you want to manage your income a couple of years before they go, so it's artificially low, right? And then two, they look at your assets. They want to see if you have a lot of assets, because they don't want to pay for your school if you can afford to pay for it otherwise, right? But what they don't do is they do not look at your retirement assets, which means you could have a couple $1 million in retirement savings, or, real estate in your IRA or something like that, and they wouldn't show at all. But if you, put that money into the bank, or you put it into raw land, or you put it into an illiquid asset that's not a retirement savings, or even if you put it into 529, they're going to see that, and they're going to expect you to contribute a large part of that to your, to your child's education. So if you're planning 20 years in the future, I would say first max your own 401k. And then if you have money left over, pretty much $500 a month will probably cover tuition at most any place in, in 20 years. So that's a good kind of ballpark per kid if you want to just have everything covered. And then the other thing I'd say would be, if you're planning for your own education, if you want to use traditional debt repayment rules, don't borrow more than what your expected income is about 5 years after graduation. So if you're going to, med school and you're going to make 300K, as a surgeon of some sort, then don't borrow more than 300K. If you're going to art school and you're going to be an artist and you're going to earn 40,000 a year, don't borrow more than 40,000. That's a good rule of thumb. That said, you can make a good argument that because of the way our student loan system is in America, it's really a tax, not a debt, because once your debt gets so high relative to your income, they take a percentage of your income, even if it's $1 million. They're taking 1% of your income. So by that measure, if you can go make more money and have 10% of it taken out and make more money after that deduction than what you'd make as a college grad just with a bachelor's degree, then it makes sense to go take out a ridiculous amount of debt. And it's terrible to say, but that's what the reality is. So, I would just say for somebody thinking about the debt, I think that before you take it out, go do something weird. So I'm a big fan of doing strange things. So go travel the world, buy a rental property that's a low risk property and manage it and see what that's like. Try to start a business and you'll probably fail, but that'll be a great experience. Take up a cooking class, and don't go get a culinary degree, but, go try to, make every single meal on like a HelloFresh or one of those kind of things, and do something really strange and just see if you're still as excited by that professional degree as you were when you were sitting in senior year and you had no idea what you were going to do next. And so you just followed a path of least resistance.
Yeah, no, I love that advice, because I'm just thinking back to, 10 years ago when I was trying to first decide my major. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I'm feeling like a lot of high school students and even some college students are feeling the same way, right? And then they get themselves into this, insane amount of debt, and then they decide to change careers, or they get a job that has nothing to do with their degree, which is fine. But now they've just put themselves in a financial position that's going to really be hard to claw back out from. And I love what you said about the Princeton example, because I have my ideas on, the way this economy works is really funny. How if you are in the middle class, I feel like you're truly at a disadvantage. You either have to be poor, because growing up, our family was not well off. That's why I was able to get grants and scholarships, and I didn't end up with a bunch of student debt. But if you're also in the upper class, then of course they want you to pay for all of your education, but you can afford it, right? So if you're in the middle class, you're not poor, you're not rich to pay for it, then you just have to continue to pay. I don't know if I'm making any sense, Travis, but I feel like, yeah, it's very interesting how this is all set up.
And I want to talk about a middle class mistake I see pretty often. So a lot of immigrant communities and a lot of immigrant families that I see, you have the first generation, which comes over to America with nothing, right? And they just pour all of their labor into building something. And a lot of times they'll be really invested in real estate. I don't know why, but that just seems like that's very common. I think, immigrant families, they don't maybe understand non-physical assets as well as physical assets. They know if they own that building, they own it, right?
We can touch it. Yeah,
you can touch it. It's real. It's something that exists. It's insured by the insurance company if it burns down. So it's a real thing. And so I see a lot of immigrant families that they really like to invest in that kind of stuff, including in their own home. So they'll view their own home as an investment. And what I see a lot of times is these families will take that money out of their home, and then they'll use it for their kids' education. And that's usually a big mistake. So I see this happen a lot, and it's really unfortunate. And then the expectation is the kid's going to go to dental school or med school or pharmacy school. And then with this higher income that they're going to get because their parents paid for it, they're expected to pay, for their own parents and the mortgage for the, the house that they took out, or the mortgage they took out, I mean. So that's a huge mistake. Like, student loans should be used to finance education and nothing else. So, for people out there that think, oh, I'm going to do a cash out refi, or I'm going to do, some sort of special, second mortgage or something to put it towards, my education or my kids' education, that's a bad idea. The interest rate being low is not a good reason, because a lot of cases, people that are, if you're going to cover only a part of somebody's education, that person probably needed to go for loan forgiveness, in which case you're just needlessly creating two payments for them. And if, the person had a small amount of debt, then they should be able to just take out, maybe a subsidized Stafford loans and pay a 0% interest rate. So it's just interesting to me how many families I see make this mistake. It's getting less common because the tax rules changed, and now you can't deduct home equity interest anymore for non-real estate related projects. But it's just something that I've seen so many times, and it's real tragic.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It seems like you're paying debt with even more debt, and you're kind of cross collateralizing your home. So that seems like a very slippery slope to me as well. So is there any tips and tricks that you'd like to share with our listeners in terms of, I guess, overall dealing with student loans, if there's anything that we haven't covered so far?
Sure. I mean, so your listeners are primarily real estate investors, right? Or interested in real estate. So, real estate's a great way to build long-term wealth. And, one of the crossover kind of topics that I've learned from student loans is I always ask people this question. Like, a lot of people are terrified with their debt growing. They hate the fact that they have negatively amortizing debt, which meaning that they're paying less than their required payment would be to cover the interest every month. And so the student loans grow and grow and grow, and eventually you have to pay them off and they're forgiven. You have to pay income taxes in the forgiven balance, because forgiven debt is taxable income according to IRS rules. So these people watch, 200K become 400K, and they're like, this is sick to my stomach. I can't sleep at night. And I say, okay, what if you had $4 million and 400,000 in debt? How would you feel? And they're like, oh, I'd feel pretty good. And so I said, exactly, because you'd have a positive net worth of, 3.6 million, right? So a lot of times, like in the real estate world, that's how a lot of conservative investors use leverage, is they won't go off and have, 80%, leverage, on every single property. They won't, 20% loan to value. They won't have that on every property. Maybe they'll have 50, or maybe they're super conservative and they have, they own 80% equity in all their properties, and they only use debt just for a little bit of a boost, So for that kind of, scenario, I think that people need to really worry about having their assets be way bigger than their student loan debt. And if they're going to do that by paying down their debt first and then focusing on assets, if they're going to do it really quickly, that's okay. But, a lot of people need to realize it's about your net worth. It's not about your debt. It's not about being $1 So that's one tip I'd say. And if for people interested in real estate, if you have a lot of student loan debt, real estate can be a great way to tax defer a lot of your gains and, very efficiently invest in assets that grow your wealth. And it can even, in some cases, give you the opportunity, I think, for some write-offs. I think I had somebody from the Bigger Pockets community reach out, because I'm certainly not a real estate expert. And he showed me some ability to write off a little bit of income off of his adjusted gross income, which lowered his student loan payment because it's based on your taxable income. So I think that there are some tricks available to real estate investors that are not available to other people in growing long-term wealth. So that would be my main kind of suggestions for listeners would be, over 2 times your income in debt, probably need to figure out forgiveness. Less than 1 times your income in debt, probably need to figure out refinancing. Somewhere in between, you might need to kind of debate what the best path is, and somebody like us could probably help you talk through that.
And I was also wondering if you can speak to our listeners a little bit about the income-driven plan that you've mentioned on your blogs, because I liked how you incorporated some retirement account strategies. I personally love, as a W-2 worker, there isn't a ton of tax strategies that you can do with a W-2 income. And that's why I love real estate. But what I realized is that I can maximize my 401k and IRAs, and I take a loan from my 401k to buy income-producing real estate, and I pay back the interest to my 401k by myself. And, I'm paying myself an interest. I get tax benefits on my W-2 income, and I'm growing my net worth with real estate. So I feel like I'm kind of hitting it from multiple cylinders. Can you kind of explain to us how the income-driven plan and retirement account strategies work?
So if your income is, I'm going to use an easy number here. I'll say your income is $78,000 and you're single and you have 200,000 of student loan debt and you're eligible for all the different income-based plans. So you are trying to figure out what your payment's going to be. So 78,000, you first get a deduction of 150% of the poverty line. So, that's about $18,000, which is why I chose 78,000 as your income, Bo. And so 78,000 minus 18 is 60. So then they're going to take that remaining 60K and they're going to take 10% of it. So that's $6,000 a year or $500 a month. If you put away money into retirement plans, that if it's done on a pre-tax basis, then that comes off of your taxable income, which means instead of taking that, 78 minus 18, they'd subtract on top of that anything you contributed to a retirement account. So let's say that you contribute the maximum for 2019, which is $19,000. So then your 78K income, would be lower by $19,000, right? And then so you would subtract that 19K from the 18 off of the 78. And so like if you say 78K minus 18K minus 19, that's 41,000 instead of 60. So now they're taking 10% of 41,000, which is $4,100. And then if you take, that number and divide it by 12, it's roughly like $350 a month or something instead of $500 a month. So you saved, you saved significant amount of money every month by contributing to retirement, which is something that everybody should be doing anyway, especially with Social Security for our generation, probably not going to be nearly as generous, right?
Nope.
So, so that's an example. I call it the indirect 401k match, because what it's basically saying is you're getting rewarded for every dollar you put into your retirement. You basically get 10 cents back with a lower student loan payment. So, that's not nearly as good as the kind of matches that are like, okay, you put in 6, I'll put in 3%, like a lot of employers do, where it's a partial match. So it's a relatively modest match, but it's still a match. And it's a match on your full contribution instead of a certain percentage of your income. So that's why I think that contributing to retirement accounts, HSAs, other weird accounts like 457s are really important.
For all my friends out there who live and die by the 2% cashback or 5% cashback credit cards, well, Travis just gave you a 10% right off the bat. So that's a very good strategy. As we near the end of our show, I'm curious to hear what your plan is for 2019 and beyond for your company. What are some of your goals? I know you mentioned numerous times that, your company is there to help people tackle student debt and take back, control of their financial future. What's in the future for you?
It's a great question. So, our company's revenue has consistently grown because the loan problem continues to get worse and worse. But it's kind of interesting. It's a little stressful on a personal level because the Congress is wanting to make student loans way more simple than they are now. So they're trying to pass a law that would create 2 payment plans. One's a 10-year plan and one's an income-based plan. And that'd be it. And right now there's like 9 different payment options. So, and that's not including refinancing. So if you have 2 plans instead of a bunch, then the reason for somebody like us to exist is less. So I would expect that we would still make money off of like refinancing or, private loans or I don't know, something like that, but it wouldn't be nearly as profitable as today. And I should be happy about that because that means, the system is a little easier to navigate and maybe I can just go working on a different problem, So that's something that will yet to be determined. If what happened to student loans happens like it did from the tax code, then there's a chance that student loans could get simple yet also get way more complicated. With things like like how the tax code had the small business deduction and the real estate opportunity zones, and all these crazy things that like open up this just huge new can of worms to learn about. So I think that, we'll either be this time next year, we're either going to be significantly larger than we are now or significantly smaller. And I would be very shocked if we're a similar size.
It's funny you mentioned the opportunity zone because in my Facebook mastermind groups and Bigger Pocket forums, I feel like every other day I see a new post about, hey, opportunity zone question, tax question, and do you have a good attorney? So yeah.
Well, apparently, yeah, one CPA presentation I went to, they said something about how like even equity in businesses that are located in opportunity zones can be eligible for like the tax-free deferred growth. So we're a startup technically located in an opportunity zone in the city of St. Louis. So I thought, shoot, does that mean I should be raising capital because they'll just give me like any valuation I ask for because it's tax-free growth? And one of the CPAs made a joke that he's like, tax benefits on a crappy investment is still bad.
Yeah.
Like if it's a bad investment, you're going to get zero back. It doesn't matter what kind of gains you get.
Right.
So I thought that was kind of funny. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, it just gives you an example that if they do create, like every time they're trying to simplify student loans, it like raises a new problem. Like right now, people can file separately for income taxes and exclude their spouse's income on certain plans. They want to do that, do away with that. Well, then there would be a huge disincentive to get married. So is America ready for like a whole bunch of people just not getting married because of their student loan debt? People want to deduct student loans from your paycheck. If they do that, then there's going to be a lot of people that live to paycheck. They're not going to be able to afford rent, in some months. And then, there's talk about making college free. Well, I mean, as good of an idea as that sounds, obviously what we've done so far and getting involved a lot in the student loan space has made college and professional programs much more expensive. So there's no good solution on either side of the aisle to tackle this that I've seen. Basically, every plan I've seen would create unique, weird problems. Like, for example, one proposal recently, I identified that it would literally create basically a 75-year IBR plan. So for certain people, certain people that have certain incomes relative to their debts, they would literally have to pay their loans for 75 years.
Did you say IBR plan?
Yeah, it's not going to happen. It was a proposal by the House kind of Republicans.
What does that stand for?
Income-based repayment, IBR.
Oh, okay.
So no, it was just a new version of that, and they were trying to get people to pay a 15% of your income plan with like no cap. Well, basically the cap was like what you'd have to pay in principal and interest on the standard 10-year plan. Yep. And so what that basically means is like some people would never hit that amount ever in their entire lives. Yeah. And so that means that you'd have a lot of people that borrow the max for school that literally be paying student loans until they're 90 something years old.
Oh, geez.
So that would obviously be pretty depressing to have that happen for people. So even if it does have an amazing net present value.
Yeah. Fully amortized that 75 years.
Well, I said, I tried to say like, hey, this is, this would suck from an administrative standpoint, but it'd be amazing from a math standpoint. I mean, you look at the net present value and a stream of cash flows discounted, over 75 years, you basically went to college for free.
Yeah, exactly. I'll take that loan for a real estate any day.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, so that might, there's just all kinds of things that could happen. Like Trump came out with an education budget today. He basically has the same exact position that he's had since he won office, which is he wants to have a 30-year repayment plan. Senate Republicans want a 20-year one. House Democrats want to expand loan forgiveness and make it eligible for all these new people. So it's just a mess. So if it stays a mess, Bo, I'll have a great business.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably why there's not a ton of competition in this space, is because no big company wants to make huge capital investments in something that's literally going to change tomorrow.
Gotcha. Well, it seems like you have a wealth of knowledge. If our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, how can they reach you?
help@studentloanplanner.com is our email address. So reach out to that. And myself or one of the team of CFPs that work for me will get back in touch with you real quick. And then if you have, just general questions, I would direct people to the blog. We've got so much free stuff in the blog. Basically, if you search Student Loan Planner plus anything you could possibly imagine, we've probably written about it. So you'll find something that's applicable for your situation. And then, whatever your profession is, go read the free stuff if you like free stuff. And if you just are like, wow, this is really annoying, I don't want to deal with this, you can hit the easy button and hire us.
Awesome. Well, I'll have all of that information and more in the show notes for this episode. If you thought that was helpful, please do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes. We'll see you right back here next week for another exciting episode of the Bigger Cash Flow Podcast. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Bigger Cash Flow Podcast. Please remember that opinions of the guests are their own, and nothing on this show should be considered personal or professional advice. Please consult your tax, legal, or financial advisor for personal advice that fit your unique situation. See you next time.